Andrew Braddock. You're claiming to be Deb Braddock, but that's okay. I can move you forward. All right.
Looks like it's saying the meeting is streaming live on Facebook now.
All right. Well, I have to assume that it's got that right. Yeah, 2 non-video participants.
Yeah, I'm seeing it on Facebook.
Great. All right. Well, in the interest of pressing on, we might get things underway now that we're streaming live.
Do you want to change it to speaker view instead of gallery view?
That's something individuals get to change. But what I will do.
But you being the host, streaming it to Facebook, you're deciding what everyone else out there sees. Everyone else out there is currently seeing gallery view.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Well, I've gone to.
That's better.
Like what you said. Thank you very much, David. Good. I'm going to mute everyone, and I will unmute those speakers as we come to them. Well, everyone's muted already, so that's good. Thank you. Thank you for coming along this evening. Tonight is the June public meeting of the Gungahlin Community Council. We're very fortunate to have secured Graham Catt's participation today, and Graham's going to talk a little bit about small business and the impact of the pandemic restrictions and what is available and what businesses can do about that situation. And then we'll do a couple of updates from the Gungahlin Community Council itself. I'll talk a little bit about our actions in the last month, talk a little bit about our survey results, and then we'll have a bit of an open discussion around what are the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 topics or issues that we as a community would want candidates for the ACT election to be thinking about. What are the things that really need to get done in Gungahlin? What are our big concerns? So that's the agenda for the day. As most people are well aware of online tools now, I will try and keep most people muted unless you're speaking. If you want to talk, please send a chat message or raise your hand in the app, in the participants list, and we'll get to you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Graham Catt. Graham is the CEO of the Canberra Business Chamber. Good evening, Graham.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to come along and speak to you. I'm sure we're doing more and more of these Zoom calls. They never seem to be quite normal, but they do seem to occupy a lot of our lives. So I'll try to talk a little briefly. I suppose the first thing I'd say is that maybe to understand what a Chamber of Commerce, or in our case, a business chamber is, we're a not-for-profit organisation. We are made up of businesses as our members. We're governed by a board of volunteers. Our members pay a fee to be a member of the chamber, and our primary income source comes from those members. And essentially, we exist for 3 reasons. The first is around advocacy and policy. So we're there to make sure that there's a conversation going on about business, about what business needs, and about how they're being impacted. We're there to make sure that we represent their views to the government, and in this case for us it's the territory government, but it's also the opposition, and we are part of the Australian Chamber movement, the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, or ACCI, and through that network we also feed issues up from the local area up into the federal government, and ACCI has very good reach into the Prime Minister's office, finance, treasury, and is pretty active in trying to get those sorts of issues across. The second reason we're there is to provide resources and information to our members. So what do they need? And that's obviously been particularly important over the last couple of months, getting information through to people, resources. That sort of began with, as we moved into the pandemic, what do I do? What's going on? Do I need to close down? So it was about steering people to the right information. That moved on very much for business to there's government relief packages being announced and almost being announced daily for some time, both by the Commonwealth and by the ACT government. And a large part of the role for us and for other industry associations was just helping our members find out what that relief was and find out how to access it and make that access as easy as we possibly could. And we really were in a time when You know, the Commonwealth Government would come out on Monday that announced that there was going to be some new assistance provided to business. There'd be some more announcements on Tuesday. The Territory Government would announce something else on the Wednesday. That would cycle back. I've never really seen anything quite like it. So trying to help people navigate their way through all that information was a very important thing. And look, the third reason we really exist is connecting businesses to each other. We've been disrupted like every other business in Australia, but one of the major difficulties for us is, of course, the way that we used to do that is bringing people together physically. So, you know, networking events. We used to run a monthly event where we get somewhere between 80 and 140 people together into a room. That would be hosted by a local business. That was their chance to show what they did and show their premises and talk about their operations. And of course, that's something that we haven't been able to do for the past few months. So like a lot of other businesses and our members, we've been scrambling using platforms like this one, just like you are tonight, and trying to find the best way we can to keep that connection going. That's really where I first came across the council, and we came across Peter. One of the things that we do as a chamber, and we have been doing for about a year now, is recognising that in most of the precincts and areas around Canberra, there are business groups or some sort of entity that has an interest in business, and we bring them together once every month or once every 6 weeks or so. We connect them to the government. A lot of their issues are around amenity and, you know, pretty fundamental things like the footpath being in good repair, like people being able to get from A to B, waste management, a whole range of issues like that. And we've been able to connect those to the relevant people in the ACT government in the services area so that they can access those services and have somewhere to go and have a line of communication straight to the people that can do something about that in government. So I guess that's a little bit about us and what we do. I was asked to speak a little bit about business, and I just got some information from a survey that came through that the Australian Chamber run. And I think this would be pretty indicative for Canberra business as well as it is for businesses nationally. And basically the headline figures of that survey are that if we look at May, 40% of small and medium enterprises in Australia experienced a decline in their revenues of 80% over that period. And 80% of businesses experienced a decline of 25% or more. That's quite a significant impact that business has been dealing with, and small business particularly. The issues that they have been grappling with have been coming at them. And I think the other thing we need to think about when we think about Canberra is this isn't something that began in the middle of March. You know, Canberra has been doing it for a range of sectors: hospitality, tourism, retail, a lot of customer-focused areas. And I actually did a walkthrough around Gungahlin with Deepak Raj Gupta a couple of months ago, just as we were sort of coming out of the smoke pollution, just to speak to businesses there about how they've been impacted by smoke and being unable to open, unable to have outdoor tables for some of the cafes, just declining demand of people being able to walk around. And so we've got to remember that, you know, a lot of our businesses have been dealing with this since December last year. That's really when the smoke started to hit. They had a really tough time all the way through January. We started to see some easing off of that, and it wasn't until into February that we were kind of confident that we'd seen the last of the smoke pollution. And then fairly quickly after that, we moved into March and started dealing with COVID-19. So, you know, our businesses have been dealing with some pretty tough conditions for quite a long time. And that's important to remember. So those kind of figures hold pretty true. And the other question is, you know, one of the questions I asked in the survey is, have you had to modify your business model, the way you operate as a result of COVID-19? And that figure stands at around 75 to 80% of businesses said yes. So for business operators out there, the vast majority of them have had to change the way they do things. And that's because of everything from you've been placed under restriction and you're unable to open, to the community's being told to stay at home and customers can't come and access you, to just changes in community behaviour and the way that we do things as a result of health restrictions. So there are very few, you know, there are some people in Canberra that aren't providing services, you know, that they're consulting into government. But even when we talk to the big end of town, if we talk to big consulting firms or lawyer firms, we're talking to people that have, you know, been taking a 20% pay cut at all levels of the business and have been laying people off. So no one's really been immune from the pain of this. People have been dealing with it in different ways. So I guess what have businesses been dealing with? So the biggest thing that we really dealt with was how do we actually manage staff, and that was the original challenge that people had. So if I have to shut down, if I have to close down, how do I manage my people? What are the IR issues associated with that? And that was probably our first wave of inquiries that we dealt with from people. And then pretty quickly, if we think about it, along came first round of government relief, and that included cash flow relief, or cash flow boost as it was called, and a few other things. And that was accessed by people. And then the next big announcement was about JobKeeper. And JobKeeper has been very much in the news at the moment. And on those headline figures as well, about 56 to 60% of businesses are accessing some sort of support from the government. And frankly, if we talk to a business that's still a business right now, that's why they're in business for the majority of businesses, because they're using JobKeeper, they're using some sort of government support to keep trading. So that's been really significant. There's a lot of issues around JobKeeper and around access to JobKeeper. And that occupied organisations like ours for several weeks, both in advocating to government and lobbying about how that should work, but also helping our members understand how to access it, what the rules were, and what to make it available. Look, JobKeeper has really been a game changer. I think a lot of businesses that would have just been closed are now essentially still in existence as an entity. They are trading in some form, but the challenge right now is we've got a lot of businesses out there that don't necessarily have a viable operating model. So they're working in some form or another. You know, the one that we hear a lot of is the restaurant or the cafe that's been able to reinvent themselves and do takeaway and delivery. They've often got staff on JobKeeper, and that's keeping the staff occupied, and they can keep them coming in. But the challenge we're seeing now, right now, I suppose we're seeing a couple of things. Is we're seeing the easing of restrictions, and for a lot of people, much quicker than we thought. And as a result of that, we're seeing people start to return to work, and that's been good. And I think we've seen a real increase in business confidence and general sentiment out there in the community. And you can see that things are ramping up. You can see the cars on the road. You can see the traffic. You can see that people are out there doing things. Along with that, though, I think the fact that we're reopening and restarting businesses has meant that many businesses need to focus on when government support isn't there anymore, when we're back in a free market, and potentially when we're back in a free market and operating still with restrictions in place or still with changed consumer behaviour. Do we have a business and a business model that's actually going to be viable going forward? And there's very variable responses to that at the moment. So we have a large number of people that, you know, and it may be that the cafe and the restaurant are going to change and their business model will be fewer people in the restaurant, deliveries, takeaway, some sort of mixed model that they wouldn't have otherwise been operating. And that's common to a whole range of different people. We need to understand for businesses, although we are returning to reopening and restarting, that those restrictions, even when we move to the stage 3 restrictions in Australia, still place restrictions on businesses. There are still limits to how many people can be in a premise. There is still the rule around 1 person per 4 square metres that impacts how many people you can have in one place. There are still rules around social distancing that impact what we can do and how businesses can actually provide goods and services to people. So a lot of the thinking at the moment is probably a mix of, I guess, as I said, increased confidence around the future, but combined with a bit of trepidation about if restrictions continue, how do we actually go forward? And look, you know, the challenge for business is, again, if we ease restrictions but leave them there to some extent, if we take away government support that's previously been there, then is the demand there to actually mean that I can operate a business viably? And the answer to that question varies greatly across places. I guess the other issue is that businesses have come into this with very varying degrees of financial stability. Some have got money in the bank and healthy balance sheets, and others really are operating on very thin margins. People's houses are on the line. For small business people particularly, you know, this is a passion, and their personal assets are locked up in this. So we're kind of in a situation at the moment where we're kind of balancing that positivity with that trepidation and angst about the future. So I guess that's sort of how I'd sum up the environment at the moment. I think the other question, and then I'll pause and see if anyone wants to have any questions, or very happy to take issues back for us as well, is around support that's available. And as I said, I think the key areas of support have been through the federal government. Firstly, things around the asset write-off. So businesses have been able to claim the full cost of purchasing assets in 1 year. Looking again, depending on your financial situation, that may or may not be useful. The second was cash flow boost, and that was something that was paid through the tax system. And that was enormously helpful for anyone that was employing people. The third was, as I said, JobKeeper, and that really was the game changer, the wage subsidy process that we put into Australia. At the moment, you may have noticed in the media, there is a pretty live conversation about the continuation of JobKeeper, and we saw the childcare sector actually learn last week that JobKeeper was going to be withdrawn for workers in that sector far earlier than they expected. And I think that's led to a lot of speculation about, will that apply to other sectors? Will there be other sectors or other businesses that also see the withdrawal of that benefit? And that may be. At the moment, to qualify for JobKeeper, you had to show that there was a 30% reduction in your revenues. So we may see the ATO and the government lift that to 50% or 40% or 54%. Or we may see, as we did with childcare, that there's a focus on particular types of business or particular sectors, and a decision that they are no longer collectively needing that benefit to keep trading. So again, a little bit of speculation and trepidation going on at the moment. The third area that was really big for businesses, particularly small businesses, was around commercial rates and commercial tenancies. So we saw the federal government introduce a mandatory code of conduct, and what that essentially said is that where you have a landlord and a tenant, they need to sit down and negotiate in good faith to come to an outcome. There's a principle of proportionality, which is that the amount of relief that a landlord is expected to give to a tenant is proportionate, a bit like JobKeeper, to the amount of revenue that that tenant has actually lost in their business. And then the jurisdictions, the states and territories, were left to actually apply that on a local basis. So the ACT government have got a corresponding code, and they supplement that by, if you're a landlord and you provide rent relief to your tenant, there is some relief available in the form of the commercial rates that you pay. And commercial rates in the territory can be very significant. So that was a sticking point for quite a while, was we had tenants looking for rent relief that just didn't have any revenue coming in through the door. We had landlords that to varying degrees were really willing to provide that and wanting to or not. But wherever they fitted on that spectrum, they didn't have access to any kind of relief on the rates that they were continuing to pay. And it took quite a while for that to be supported. So they're the key areas of support in the federal government area. There is a website, just business.gov.au, which is sort of the go-to place to access that sort of information. There's a lot of information on our website, Canberra Business Chamber, which is www.canberrabusiness.com. There's guides that we've produced. There's an employer's guide to JobKeeper, for example, that's been really helpful for people. There's an employer's guide to COVID-19. There are checklists. There's a range of other resources there. And then to move to the territory government, there are a number. The territory government's announced two different, they call them economic rescue packages. And those packages basically contain relief for residents and people in need, but also for small businesses. There have been some rebates, as I spoke about, for commercial rates for those people that own a property. Either you own a property and operate out of it, or you're a tenant in a property that's owned by a landlord. And it's through the ACT government that you can access that commercial rate relief and rebates. There is some relief that's been provided around payroll tax. There is some relief that's being provided around electricity bills and some of those sorts of issues. So there's a range of probably much smaller scale support that's available out there through the territory. And again, you can come to, if you're interested or you know someone that you think would benefit from that information, very welcome to come to our website at www.canberrabusiness.com. When you're there, we put out a weekly email bulletin, and in that bulletin, we basically summarise anything we know of that's happened in that week, either politically or in the form of new programs or new initiatives that have been put out there, or new resources that have been made available. So if you do know someone in business, visiting our website, getting onto that mailing list, you don't have to be a member to receive that communication at the moment. We want to help as many people as we can. And that will give you a weekly update and a weekly set of links to go and access different information and different resources that are out there. And to wrap up, you know, the territory as well has got a range of, I think if you go to, I'm not sure what their website is, let me just have a quick look. There is actually covid19.act.gov.au, and that's where you go to access the territory's range of resources they have available. And actually, look, one more that I should plug, and then I'll stop for some questions. There is a service called the Business Enterprise Centre, or the Canberra Business Enterprise Centre, and they were funded through discussions with us and with the Southern New South Wales Business Enterprise Centre, and they are actually funded by the Territory Government to provide any small business that needs it with 4 hours of one-on-one face-to-face support. That can be a review of the business plan, that can be where do I go to access some help, that can be I need to get my shop online, how do I do it? And so there's a whole range of, and that initial face-to-face consultation with a business advisor is part of that package. You can access that probably through our website, or if you were to Google Canberra BEC, as in Business Enterprise Centre, that would be available through there as well. So look, if you are, or you do know someone in business, I think often it's that tangible, I just need to talk to someone who understands business and get some guidance about where to go and what to do. I think that Business Enterprise Centre resource is there. And for many people, it's a lifesaver. And frankly, you know, often at the moment, these are tough times, and just being able to talk to someone who understands where you're at and where you're going through is a really invaluable resource for business operators to access as well. So certainly encourage you, if you or you know someone, to think about that one as a resource as well. So Peter, I think that sort of covers it pretty broadly. If anyone's got any specific things I can share or answer, I'm very happy to do my best, and hand back over to you.
Thanks very much, Graham. Look, I've got a couple of questions, but I'm a nice guy, so I'm going to ask Mainul Haq to unmute himself and ask a question. He just fired me a question.
Graham, thanks very much for coming and talking to us with such a short notice. You have covered mostly everything, except one of the issues SMEs are having, navigating Services Australia website and their complex bureaucracy. What can you provide? What assistance can you provide to the SMEs? Most of them are moms and dads, cafe owners. I know for a couple of cafe owners, couple of restaurants, businesses. They have been to MLAs, they have been to MPs. They didn't have any luck.
Yep.
What can you do for them, and what they should do, what they could do?
Yeah. Look, I think, as I said, I did a walk around Gungahlin. I met a few of the cafe operators around there. So I'd answer that in a couple of ways. First of all, what we can do, the most valuable thing that we've been doing for businesses over the past few months, as I said, is actually just helping them unravel the massive information that's coming at them, so they can understand, if any, what government support there is out there and how to access it. And that, I really can't overstate how important that's been. It's been so fast and so furious and so much information that just helping people actually navigate their way through that has been really important. Secondly, for those businesses that employ people, one of the biggest benefits that we provide as a chamber is someone that they can actually access and talk to, because this whole period has thrown up a whole range of issues about my staff. What do I need to do the right thing by them? What does the law say? What should I be doing? How do I deal with that? COVID's changing things, and they have a JobKeeper. So for members of the chamber, that's been a really significant service, and that's something where you actually pick up the phone and talk to a lawyer that's based in their office. And so I know from our members that that's something that they find particularly invaluable. And look, thirdly, what we can do is raise their issues with the government. And as I said in the beginning, you know, we're there to do three key things really: connect people, give people information, and advocate for people. And the more that we can get those stories through from business, and we genuinely do, and they help us actually try to get that message through to the ACT government to say, look, people are in need of support here. I know from a lot of businesses that what the government's providing just isn't hitting the mark. It's not helping their business. They're operating on 30% of the revenue they used to have. They're looking at an uncertain future where JobKeeper's not going to be there, and trying to get that message across to the government is one of the most fundamental things that we can do. Back on the practicalities, there are a range of things as well. Like again, if people look at our website, people again talk about, well, how do I redo a business plan so that when we reopen, and we know that we're going to reopen with a different business model and different seating and different capacity, how do I do it? There are courses that we run that are subsidised and free courses if you go through that business enterprise centre operation that will help them actually do that. And you know, a lot of from shops, for example, a lot of this has been, I've got to get myself online really quickly. How do I do that? So there's some very practical things that we offer as well. But I'm wondering if the gist of your question is really more about, you know, that government support. And all we can do, you know, we can't open the government's coffers and we can't take the revenue out. But all we can do, and as we have been very much since, you know, as I said, this isn't since March, it's December last year, just trying to help governments understand and get the message across that, you know, the businesses that you're talking about are in the dire situation that they're in, and they need the help that they need. So I hope that's enough of an answer. Bit of a mix of the tangible and the, you know, and the less tangible. But again, the other thing I'd say is, you know, we have seen more and more people join the chamber over the past 3 months, which has been interesting. And I think a large part of the reason they're joining is because of those things, because we do feed their voice through to government, because we can help steer them through if they're employing people, some of those issues, and we do that well. And because it gives them access not just to information, but also to other people that they can share their experiences with.
Thanks, Graham. A couple other people with their hand up. Henley, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, thanks, Graham, for coming down. I appreciate your time. So look, in ACT at the moment, we can't have more than 20 people gather, you know, for the funeral or marriage, or, you know, all the restrictions around, even for the house gathering and stuff. But last week we had a big protest, and it looks like it's safe to do so. And you know, what's your thoughts? You know, like when the business are struggling, when the families are struggling, if government can allow those kind of protests, like 600 to 700 people gathered in the city, you know, when that's safe to do so, why can't we support our farmers and, you know, our local business to come out? And do you think, you know, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, my thoughts are my personal thoughts. I should preface them by. I would say, first of all, I think those protests, particularly Sydney and Melbourne, as much as Canberra, were just incredibly divisive. And if they achieve nothing else, as we were hopefully on a journey as a country out of, you know, and in a situation where we had a lot to be positive about, I think they set us back. I think they've divided people around, you know, I don't think it's not the issue itself. It's the wisdom of people going and gathering in those sort of numbers. And when you think about, you know, we're pretty blessed here in the ACT. had one case of COVID, and that wasn't a community transmission in weeks. We're in a pretty safe position, but Sydney and Melbourne CBDs aren't the same. And, you know, gatherings of thousands of people in those sorts of circumstances, it's very hard to see how that makes any sense. And Henley, I agree. You know, when I think about our hotels, our restaurants, our hospitality operators, that it's not just that they're restricted, it's that they're working incredibly hard to create business models where their staff are safe, where the customers are safe, working with regulations, really. And, you know, I know those industries are doing it, you know, busting a gut. I've seen the Hotels Association, for example, and the union working together to say, here's a joint plan so we can get hotels open again. That's the unions and the industry body working hand in hand, because they just want to get people back to work and want to get started. And so, you know, it's incredibly frustrating for those industries to go, well, hang on a minute, we're working hard to get 20 people into our premises, 4 square metres in place and 1.5 metres apart, and ticking off every health regulation we can, but we can have 600 people standing in square together. It just doesn't make sense. So, you know, we've communicated that to government and to the Chief Health Officer, and that didn't lead to any change in whether those protests were run. And yeah, as I said, I think it's just a shame, wherever you might stand on the issue of the process and the right of people to protest generally. I think at a time when, you know, business is on a road to recovery, and they're managing restrictions and doing it well and investing greatly in it, I think have those protests and that many people gather seemingly without any kind of attention to health issues just doesn't make any sense. And it's incredibly frustrating for those businesses that, as you say, dealing with restrictions still, and have got them ahead of them for what, months to come.
Yep. Yeah, it's a fickle business, and we could have a conversation about borders, but let's not do that, because the immediate local region is not too bad. I've got a hand up from Darren Marks.
Hi, how are you? Just a quick question, a little bit left of field of the coronavirus for a second, but we've often had various conversations with the ACT government about zoning in the central sort of business district of Gungahlin, and looking at the zoning for you know, primarily business within Gungahlin, and the fact that the ACT government sort of more leans towards residential apartments as opposed to sort of business zoning specifically. I'm just curious, with a few of the meetings that we've had, when we've brought up the concept that when they're talking about the evidence that they've presented about that there's a lack of demand from business to want to sort of set up in Gungahlin. One of the things that we sort of have talked to the ACT government about is what they've initiated in order to encourage more businesses to sort of set up in Gungahlin, and what processes do they have in place in order to help facilitate and support that, rather than doing studies that seem to just default to say that there's just no interest. Often we're looking for the evidence in order to support that. What's your sort of opinion on that in regards to the ACT government's approach in order to sort of facilitate the coming together of investment in the Gungahlin region?
Yeah, it's a good question. We kind of have on our policy platform, as we came into 2020, we basically have a series of issues, and they're really arranged under 4 key pillars. And one of those is around investment. And one of the things that we recognise is that the territory is a place that is, you know, we have a particular social structure, and it revolves around town centres and precincts. And as I said at the beginning, you know, we've been engaging with some of the older, you know, Fishwick, Hume, Mitchell, Phillip, Gungahlin and Newer district. And one of our policy positions is, you know, you can't have winners and losers in that equation. So, you know, we're a great advocate that we should be investing in the CBD. We're an advocate that we should be investing, for example, in the convention centre and that precinct down there, because it's good It drives tourism, but it also does drive investment. But we're also an advocate that there needs to be investment across all of those precincts, and they all should be thriving, because that is the way that this city is actually structured. It's not structured around a CBD. And, you know, I suppose comparison would probably be Adelaide or Hobart. Those cities very much are built around a city centre, but we're not. We're built around satellites. So it's a policy position of ours that we should be encouraging business into local areas. We haven't gone as far as saying what those incentives should be. Often, certainly in those older areas, as I was saying, you know, they're fundamental amenities. They're cracks in the pavement. They're grass growing out of gutters. They're, you know, bad decisions about location of waste next to existing businesses, or inability to move from one place to another. For, you know, for Mitchell, it's not getting a tram stop in Mitchell in the area as it travels out to Gungahlin. So, you know, there's a whole range of specifics. And I guess our overall view as well is that, you know, you guys, and where there is some sort of, whether it's a community council, whether it's a business group in a particular local area, you know, the best guides for government of what investment looks like and what they should be putting into those areas is going to come from that local group. And that's something that, you know, we were certainly taking into the election. Our kind of utopia is that, you know, there's almost like a grant program or an investment approach that comes and talks to the local area in order to have that put in there. Because you know, I think, Darren, the flip side of that is, yes, there are frustrating stories about not encouraging investment where it's needed, and there are crazy stories of investment which doesn't seem to align at all with what the areas actually want or need. You know, it's like the bike track that doesn't quite finishes 90% of where it's meant to go, or, you know, the services where no one lives. So yeah, look, that's our view. You know, we believe in driving investment in the territory generally, and we believe that for that to work properly, you can't have winners and losers across precincts. And so I know, you know, as I said, Deepak's someone I talk to sort of fairly regularly. I know he's very passionate about the area and trying to get that through into the Assembly. But again, Peter's connected with us. You know, it'd be good to learn more. You know, if there's some information about what's been frustrating in the past or what's needed, very happy to take it on board as a chamber as well.
Thanks.
Okay, I think that's a prompter for a couple of our posts to go your way. Look, no one else has got their hands up, and there are no other comments. I guess just quickly, Graham, do you think there's anything unique about Canberra in terms of how it's had to deal with the crisis and what the impact of the pandemic has been on Canberra versus any other part of Canberra? And yes, if so, what should we be advocating for to address that?
I guess what's been unique about Canberra compared to other jurisdictions is the industries that drive Canberra. You know, one of the things that we put out, this is no longer a public service town. So 235,000 people, 66% of everyone who works in Canberra is employed by the private sector, not the public service. However, you know, one of the things that makes us unique is that means we still have a very large proportion of people, 1/3, that are actually employed by government, and therefore to some extent are buffeted by being part of the public service and not being in the private sector and essentially not subject to the market. So that does make us unique. It gives us a different pool of people in terms of how COVID-19 or something like this impacts them. So that's the first factor. The second one is when you look at the industries that drive Canberra compared to other places, there are a few things that are really clearly missing from here. Manufacturing would be one of them. Primary industry would be another. So some of the things that drive our economy are quite different. And then if you look at the areas that do drive our economy, one of them is tourism, which just got decimated. One of them is international education, one of our top 5 industry, just got decimated. And And then the remainder of our sort of drivers really revolve around that sort of smart area. So cyber, renewables, technology, defence-related contracting, some of those sorts of things. So, you know, we came into this with probably 5 or 6 key industry sectors or capability sectors, as the government calls them, and 2 of them just got wiped out.
Yeah.
The third thing that's probably unique about us is we also have a very, very high proportion compared to other, because we don't have manufacturing, primary industry, a range of other industries, we have an incredibly high proportion of those sort of consumer, customer facing small businesses that are the ones that got hammered the hardest by COVID. So we kind of got a bit of an upside in the public service and the presence of government here, and the fact that that means there are a group of people who to some extent are protected and their incomes are protected from the market. But we've got a downside in terms of these industries that are affected. I guess the question, I did another one of these for a different community council, and they said, what can we do to help? Which I thought was a really good question. And I guess the answers are, we would be thinking about, you know, how do you buy local? And how do you connect with those businesses? Can you as a community, you know, is there anything you can do to promote them? Because I think, you know, for you as a community council, one of the ways that you can contribute is encourage your community to buy local, to understand what a local business is versus an international or you know, another form of business, and think about how you can work with those. I think you know, we talked a little bit about advocacy. I think it's trying to help, you know, through DPAC or through other MLAs or other engagements that you might have. Maybe help paint that picture of what the local business scene actually looks like, so they can see it and hear it. That's very important. Yeah, I think I don't know what your mailing list is, but that's probably the other one for me is, you know, what messages can you get out to the people that read your information that sort of say, look, you know, at the moment, our recovery is going to be about people using local businesses, people appreciating that. It might be, you know, if you got a safe job and you're in a good position and you had a project you were going to do later on and you're iffy about it, bring it forward, don't put it off, because that's the thing that's going to keep contractor or subby or other people in that ecosystem employed as well. So yeah, that's probably the things that make us unique, and I think that's probably for a group like yours the kind of things to be thinking about. How do you support them? The other one might be the clubs. I think your community clubs generally are also looking for support, and you know, most of them are reopening, and they're not reopening to make massive profits. They're reopening because, you know, they're driven by that role they play in the community as a place for people to connect and go, and there's a whole lot of social benefit that falls out of that as well. And it might be worth perhaps engaging with the clubs and seeing if there's something you can do with them or to help them out. Could be appreciated.
That's great, Graham. Yeah, we've sort of tried to do that, but I guess being, you know, like all messages, every message repeated often is going to get a lot more mileage than one that's delivered once. Graham, look, that's been really useful and really interesting. We'll definitely take up your offer to have a further discussion about how do we attract some more employment and more business into Gungahlin. I've just sent you a short note with some of the collateral we've generated in advocacy with the planning department, but of the ACT government, but that might be just the basis for a conversation. So thank you very much for coming along. You're welcome to stay on and enjoy the rest of the game, or you can go and grab some dinner. So
I might. I've got some young people that keep appearing in my group. Hopefully out of sight. So thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the opportunity to come and join you all as well. Great to meet you, or meet you. And enjoy the rest of the meeting.
Thanks very much, Graham.
Okay, good night, everybody.
All right, so look, I'll just try to get control of my computer. Let's do that first. Share screen. I've just got some PowerPoint slideshow. Like all good discussions, you always need a little bit of content. So let me just get some slides up here. We've already had Graham speak, and I thought that was a pretty interesting perspective on all things COVID, but also on some of the challenges with things in Canberra and in the districts like Gungahlin. I'll talk a little briefly to the GCC update in terms of things that have been going on in the past month. I think most residents will be well aware of the development application for the amended development application for the establishment development, the former Air Towers building on the corner of Gozard Street and Gundaroo Drive. On the basis of some data you'll see in a minute when we talk about the GCC survey, the Community Council's been opposed to this development. We think it's just an entirely inappropriate scale of development for that location. There are plenty of other locations where a development of that scale makes a lot of sense, but not that corner. And we've done a lot of work with the YMCA, who are directly adjacent to that site, and a lot of media. And we put in a representation yesterday, which was the last day for representations on that development application. We've done a little bit of work on cycling infrastructure in partnership with Pedal Power. That's directly related to identifying opportunities for improving active travel in the Gungahlin region. And we've developed a little sort of priority list of infrastructure projects to support cycling that's on our website, or contact us. And we've also co-signatory to a letter to Minister Steele, Minister for Transport, around some other issues related to cycling infrastructure. We're continuing to chase not an election commitment, and a commitment made by Suzanne Orr, member for Yerraby and Minister for Community Services, about a commitment to develop a community centre in the town centre. We've not seen a lot of detail about that, and we continue to chase that, and hopefully we'll make some progress on that tomorrow morning when we've got a meeting with one of the other Yerraby MLAs, Deepak Rajgupta. Some of you, hopefully all of you, have noticed that the speed limit on the Barton Highway has been reduced from 100 kilometres an hour to 80 kilometres an hour between the intersection with William Slim Drive and approximately Belladon Road. Now, this is the result of some analysis that was done by the Department of Transport that they tell us indicated there was a sufficiently high number of serious accidents that they could get some federal government funding under the Black Spots program to remediate some aspects of that and also reduce the speed limit to 80 kilometres an hour. This has caused some residents to be a bit bent out of shape because, well, why would you do that? And we've chased up the department, the Transport Directorate. We've got a response. We've posted it on the website. But the short story is, it's been reduced to 80 kilometres an hour. It's now consistent with the 80k zone in front of the Gold Creek development, and essentially from the edge of Canberra into Canberra, it will be now 80k's permanently. So everyone, watch out for the fact that it's now 80k's. Most Gungahlin residents will be aware that these development applications for the cinema project and for the Defence Housing Authority building, which are actually on the same block next across the road from the Coles supermarket, both got approved in the last few weeks. Both of them have less car spaces in the development than was required by the Parking and Vehicular Access Code. And we did question the Planning Directorate as to why they'd been approved, even though they had a shortfall in the number of recommended car spaces. And in the case of the cinema, it's quite a significant shortfall. It's about certainly less than half what the code recommends. And they've come back with a response, which I haven't got around to posting on our website, but it's essentially, look, we've done some analysis, and that plus the access to public transport allow us to make a decision that it's an acceptable outcome. So I'll leave all of you to ponder upon that when I get that posted. But they're the sort of things we've been pursuing over the past month. I guess we could pause there. Are there any questions on any of those topics? Says Peter, who's now lost control of his screen again. Meeting controls, participants. No one's raising their hands. Nope. Okay. All right. Well, look, I'll move on to the results from the community survey. And I think it's really important to remember this is not Peter Alford doing lots of work and taking all the glory. This is Peter Alford showing up pretty much at the end of a lot of work by Kevin Cox and supported by all of the members of the Community Council executive. We got a lot of data back from this, and a lot of it was free text data, and we sort of petitioned that up amongst the members of the executive, and they've all provided a summary of those free text answers to go along with the numerical answers. So a lot of the hard driving was done by Kevin, who's a veteran of the Community Council, but also from the other members of the executive, and I thank them for that. So why would we bother doing a survey given how much effort it is to do? If you look at our website and go to the bit where it says what do, we strive to do all these things. Provide a local forum, local voice, concern, foster identity, la la la. But there's a whole bunch of things around creating a forum for concerns and suggestions, being a local voice, or a local voice about what? Address matters of local concern. Well, what are those concerns? We've got to try and meet community needs and expectations. Well, how do we know what those expectations are? We need to communicate both locally and regionally. We need to provide advocacy to government, and we need to represent facilities and represent and advocate for facilities and services. But what are those? What are they that the community wants? So the survey is a really important way of us gathering data and making sure that instead of answering all these questions with, oh, we reckon, well, it's actually a bit of a data-driven approach. So this is the second major survey we've done in the last 5 years. We did a very big survey, very similar survey in 2014, Have Your Say 2014. And we had 1,300 responses over 3 months. It was done online. And provided a really good basis to inform our activities. So when we came back to look at this for 2019, we needed to update the topics. There was no point asking questions about whether you wanted light rail or not because it had been built. So that was not a useful question to ask anymore, for example. We needed to develop a good understanding and make sure we validated the issues that we would advocate for in the ACT election. And that's essentially making sure that we can go to candidates for the seat of Werribee and say, well, these are the things that the Gungahlin community cares about. What are you going to do about it? And we were also obviously keen to increase participation because obviously lots more people now live in Gungahlin. So if we got 1,300 responses in 2014, we were certainly aiming to get at least that. And but understand, 1,300 responses from a community of then would have been about 60,000 is actually extremely good. I mean, that's a very high number of responses and very strongly representative of at least the people who've received it. We did a few things. We had a different logo, but we were doing an online survey again, largely based on the 2014 survey, updated as I suggested, and promoted it mostly digitally through Facebook, where we boosted the posts so that we forced ourselves into the Facebook streams of people. We promoted it through our email list, which has got over 930 addresses on it. It was widely shared. We certainly talked about it on the radio, posted it on Twitter and so on. And we got over 1,500 responses. So we were very, very happy with that. Like a lot of things, it wasn't a steady stream, lots of fits and starts, but it was really interesting to see the impact of pushing our message out through Facebook in a boosted way and how many more responses came as a result. So, the downside to using these mechanisms is you really are reaching the people who are generally aware of things through Facebook or email. It's quite hard to reach others short of lots of handouts and so on, which we did last year, in 2014, but it actually got very few additional responses, so we didn't bother with that this year. All right, so, and this is the challenge is, how do you make a presentation around the numbers? So I've hopefully made this a little bit interesting as we go. So I haven't necessarily walked through every question, and in some places like this one, I've lumped a bunch of question answers together. So nearly twice as many females as males responded to the survey. And not surprisingly, the vast majority, over half, were between 25 and 44 years old. Very few very young people, and a very modest number of older Canberrans, older Gungahlin or whatever they are. In terms of where people work, 25% of people work in civic, 12% in the government triangle, the parliamentary triangle. So, you know, it's 37, nearly 40% of all people are there, are sort of heading south every day. But interesting, 11% of them were working in Gungahlin and 9% at home. Be fascinating to run the survey again to work out how many people are working now from home as a result of the pandemic. But that's the joy of statistics. You can get almost any answer you want if you ask it in the right way at the right time. In terms of commuting, I just threw this in here because it relates to the workplace. Over 82% of people were getting to that workplace via their own car, and just 17% on public transport. So still, like most of Canberra, heavily weighted to personal cars, personal transport. So getting into some of the nitty-gritty, this was one of the early questions around what commercial outlets and amenities would you like to see, and you know, in my experience with these, really you're only looking for the big bars, the things that stand out. So, you know, in this case, over 60% of respondents indicated they wanted more entertainment services, followed by electrical and household goods, restaurants, electrical and household goods, fashion and clothing, and then a bunch of other stuff, which is, you know, lower. So the question is, well, what do they want? And with most of the questions, as I suggested earlier, you could type in some free text stuff. And this is the case where we've done a word frequency count thingo, a Wordle document to find out what people were asking about. And interestingly, still lots of people saying, I want a cinema or a movie theatre, which is good because that's coming at last. A lot of people wanted a spotlight store. That's great. One's been announced in the Magnet Centre, the old Magnet Park site, but also you know, some specific things like butchers and more cafes, which we saw before, but also spaces and outdoor and community things, and that's a theme that popped up a little later on, and the usual word things, you know, movie theatre got repeated, and, you know, and different spellings and so on. And while we're on town centre, and this really goes to the heart of why the GCC has been responding as it has on some of these high-rise residential sites. And these numbers are really similar, like ridiculously similar to the numbers we got in 2014, particularly in relation to the maximum height of buildings in the town centre, where, you know, 4% of residents want a maximum height of 12 stories or less in the town centre. So that's a really strong message that people don't want gigantic buildings. And a new question for 2019 was how much the remaining open space in the town centre should be residential. And you know, 58% of responses indicated they don't want any more residential. 27% said they want 25% of the remaining development to be residential. 12% said they want 50-50 residential versus commercial, and just 2% said mostly residential. So, you know, 3/4 residential, 25% commercial. But the clear message here is, you know, the community doesn't want to see more residences in large buildings, and that's, you know, the people speak. That's how the council jumps. Just I couldn't work out how to make this graphically look nice, so I just went with simple words. Parking, everyone wants more or better parking, and in the question it was asked, well, what sort of parking do you want? There was pretty even support for underground or multi-story car parks, but the clear message is we want more and we want it to be better managed, and that came out in other comments around improving the traffic flow and the way intersections work in the town centre. The last two comments here under general, the first two bullet points under general, a lot of people said they'd like to see some of the open areas between the buildings and the town centre covered up, so it's easier to move around in inclement or weather, whether it's hot or cold or wet. And 6% of people, when commenting on the town centre, said we needed some more employment there. And then here's some of the more interesting questions really come out when you start to think, well, I'm looking at the biggest bars, using the Peter Elford way of analysing graphs, look at the big ones. If you then clump them together, so, in terms of additional recreation facilities, overwhelming support for some form of indoor sports centre, which, by the way, contradicts some comments made by Environment and Planning Group, EPSDD, in relation to some work they were doing on the Casey site, where there's some community land there. So very strong support for an indoor sports centre. But if we then think about the next four, all of which rated pretty strongly, over 25% of respondents in all of those four cases, it's all about trying to engage in green spaces and be outside. So public, barbecue areas, walking paths, nature trails, playgrounds. Given the demographic in Gungahlin, it's hardly surprising. Lots of young people. Some very brave people who wanted to have outdoor swimming places in lakes and ponds. Most of the times I've looked in Yerraby Pond, I've not thought about it as a place I would like to swim. That's maybe just me. But then, walks with signage, more cycle paths. So lots of things about engaging outside and activating our green spaces. And then another one that surprised me when we talked about community facilities, the three topics that got the strongest responses were not build a building, build a park, create something. They were, we want activation. We want something to happen. We want street markets. We want festivals, events, like food markets or Floriade. We want theatres, plays, concerts, cultural shows. And, big bars, these are big bars, like 60% of responses were people responding say they wanted these things. So they're very large numbers of a very representative group. And so we've previously mentioned that we're working to resurrect the Celebrate Gungahlin Festival. And just in the last few weeks, we've been fortunate enough to secure an Events ACT grant to support that event, which is big news, which will be on early scheduled for 2021, in the first quarter of 2021. So keep your eyes peeled out for that. So, key messages around, I want to activate things. I want to do stuff, not just necessarily visit stuff or build stuff. And then unsurprisingly, when we get to environmental services, apart from obviously people want lots of hard waste collection, and it's good to know that the ACT government is got some trials of hard waste collection going on. But then the next four areas all relate to improving our open and green spaces, more trees, plantings to cope with climate change, better maintenance of native strips, increased grass mowing in park areas. So, how do we support those green spaces? So I thought this was pretty interesting in terms of responses. Maybe we should have asked questions around how important is green spaces to you, but we certainly got that strong message come through that these are important to people and residents. I'm just checking. One of my colleagues will sort of wave at me if I'm droning on. If anyone's got any questions, I will pause at the end and people can go back. So take notes. Roads. No Gungahlin Community Council presentation. It would be about general stuff, would be complete without a comment on roads. We asked which roads needed to be duplicated, remaining roads need to be, which roads still need to be duplicated that aren't. So Gungahlin Drive topped the list with 26% of people saying it needed duplicating. This is called, of course, Gungahlin Drive is duplicated from Gundaroo Drive south, but not north. And I think everyone who uses that piece of road between Gundaroo Drive and all the way back to Casey, to be honest, it's really congested in peak hours in both directions. So south in the morning and north in the evenings. So that's hardly surprising. Ports Park Drive, unsurprisingly, should have been built, duplicated from day one, but wasn't, but is high up. Gundaroo Drive, people want it duplicated, yep. And it's been coming now for, I think we're into our 4th year of completing that duplication. But I do note that the segment between Mirabai Drive and Horse Park Drive of Gundaroo Drive isn't planned for duplication. But I suspect the impact of all the high-rise towers and other things may mean that needs to be brought forward. And then Mirabai Drive and Clary Hermes. And then other streets that needed attention, unsurprisingly, most of those inside the town centre, consistent with the other questions we're asking about, what are the issues in the town centre? So that's pretty good. Good consistency of opinion coming through. We asked some questions about public transport, not whether they wanted a light rail, of course, but the hot topic when we put this together was the new bus timetable. And ideas, the very idea that people were being discouraged from using public transport because of social distancing reasons. In 2019, it's hard to imagine we'd even think that. But anyway, we asked people to indicate what they thought of the new bus timetable, and of those that indicated they use public transport, it was only about 55%. Over 50% said they were worse off, so that's not great. And of course, most people will know that Transport Canberra did respond to those concerns that were aired through the Community Council, and they had a cunning plan to address it, all of which has been deferred until we emerge from the COVID crisis. And again, similar pretty negative feedback around the school bus experience changes. So we did ask people, well, what would you like to do about it? And people generally said, well, more. Generally, if you ask people what they want, they usually want more of something. But there were more buses for suburbs, specific destinations to support schools. Clearly, the government really hadn't planned for the possibility that light rail would be an outrageous success. And so generally, there were a lot of people saying you need to improve the light rail capacity at peak times. And people were commenting that there needs to be better parking and cycling infrastructure at the stops, particularly park and ride, because that was a combination that worked well for a lot of people. And we asked some questions about policing and law enforcement. Interestingly, the biggest concern people indicated was car hoons. And I see that's pretty current. You often hear tyres squealing out and about. But the second biggest one is, and arguably related, is that very little people were concerned about the lack of a visible police presence. And we've had people from the AFP Association, not the AFP, the AFP Association, talking about the fact that there's been no substantive change in the police staffing in Gungahlin for about a decade, over a period of time when Gungahlin's hugely expanded. So clearly that needs work. People were asked to identify where they thought where they felt unsafe. And the Gungahlin Town Centre, Gungahlin Place bus interchange was the highest ranked, and Vieira Pond Parks was about 12%. I accidentally deleted that. And they've suggested better light, and responses indicated better lights or more policing would help with that. And then just to conclude, we did ask, what else do you want? And there were about 700 text responses to that. About 100 comments on drones, mostly negative. Over 100 comments seeking more trees and open space, so that theme came through again. Quite a lot of comments on improving social infrastructure, community, and things like community services, and we'll talk a bit about this in a moment. More health facilities, and expansion in schools, often a strong perception, probably well grounded, that the schools are pretty stretched in terms of accommodating the demand. Gungahlin College running late in the evenings to add extra classes and so on, and the demand for more training spots. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of a flavour for the sort of things that came out of that, out of the survey. I guess, please raise your hand or throw something in the chat window, which I seem to have lost. If you've got any questions. Oh, I do see a chat there. Yes, Andrew Braddock says, can you please put these up on the website? And I'll absolutely do that. We actually are trying to write that up as a bit of a summary report like we did in 2014. Just other things have got in the way of that happening. But we've done a lot of the analysis, as I suggested, as a team, and we've got most of that there now. Any other questions or comments? No hands up, no pieces in there. Okay. Right, well, I will soldier on because we did have, as usual, we had people lined up to speak this week, this month, but they were unable to make it. But perhaps, and by the way, the next section is absolutely interactive, or I'll burst into tears and cry. It's very important we get people giving some sort of feedback on this. David or someone else, are you checking to see if there are any questions on Facebook? Yes, someone is. Good, great. And you'll chat that through or something. So one of the things we as a community council really need to do, and certainly every other community council in Canberra is doing the same thing, and all the community councils are looking to put together a collective position, as it were, on what are the things that need to be done in their district. And so the community council has sat down, looked at the survey reports, sort of worked out what's sort of hot and what's not, and what issues have come up in the last year or so, and thought, well, what are the big lumpy things that we need to put on the table that need to get done in Gungahlin? What are the big issues? What are the opportunities that need to be addressed? And we can get into the footpath between this street and that street's not right and needs to be fixed, and that's important. But in terms of trying to engage with an MLA, you need to have some pretty simple, or potential MLAs, you need to have some simple messages around these are the key topics we need focus on. And so these are the topics we've lumped together as an executive, and I'm sort of interested in getting feedback from other members of the executive again, or from anyone on the call about, well, what have we missed? So this largely fits into this idea that Gungahlin is almost completed. There's only about 1.5 suburbs, so half of Jacka and the suburb of Kenny are yet to be developed. And the Jacka portion is due to come out this year. So we're getting close to being all done in terms of construction. But we are clearly massively underserved for community facilities, including community halls and community spaces, sport and recreation facilities, tennis courts, netball courts, all of that. Aged care facilities, we have, that would be none in Gungahlin. So that, there are a whole range of community facilities that we need to get done, and we're running out of space to put them. So if you look at a map of Gungahlin, exactly where you could put things is running out, and it's not clear what the plan is for how the community infrastructure of Gungahlin will be complete. The Community Council has been lobbying for 2.5 decades to improve employment in Gungahlin, to try and secure a major employment base here, and it's very difficult given the competition for office space in Canberra. But that still remains an important driver. One of the things that may come out of COVID is that maybe we don't need offices and maybe we need smaller employment hubs or something. I'm not sure, but some level of creativity is needed to address this, or we're going to have an awfully large number of people living in Gungahlin, but very few people working in Gungahlin, relatively. Infrastructure of a whole bunch of forms, but almost all of it related to transport, needs to be finished off. And that includes road duplication, improving the parking and the way parking and roads work in the town centre, addressing public transport needs, not only with the buses and light rail, maybe thinking about extensions of light rail, although that's pretty optimistic in the current light rail environment, but certainly looking at station-based infrastructure for cycling and walking, better walking paths into the town centre and light rail, and other forms of active travel. Gungahlin's retail spaces and infrastructure have been pretty narrow around lots and lots and lots of supermarkets, and large department stores and Target and Big W and Kmart. And so it'd be great to see some more variety in that space. That's a theme that we teased out. We've had a lot of frustrations with the planning process, and I'm generous with the term process, and there needs to be better community consultation engagement. And we know this can work because occasionally it happens. So there was a very good piece of consultation over the Gold Creek site, and we just need to see more of that, we would hope. Got the clean message about improving and activating green space. We talked briefly about crime and public safety, and then health services was the last item we have here. So let's have a quick chat about that. Now I can see that Mark, I'm not sure who Mark is, but I'll ask them to unmute and ask their question or make their comment. Oh, it's Mark. Okay.
Can you see me or hear me?
Unfortunately, I can hear and see you.
Oh, okay. I don't know which way my camera's going. I'm doing something different this time. Look, I think that certainly all the points that you've raised are on point, which is good. Like obviously the intel and the data that the GCC has been collecting over the years, is going to good worth, and I think the survey will be good for us as we lead into the election. I think for me, I think our family is a good representation of Gungahlin families. We moved here 14 years ago, I think, and since then we've had 2 kids. But Gungahlin's well serviced for young kids. I've got lots of playgrounds and exciting playgrounds, but what we're now missing is activities and space for kids as they get older. And that's my big concern now, is that as my kids get older, is what are they going to do to entertain themselves? Going back, I think about 8 years ago, Casey was committed an irrigated recreation park, which would have provided half courts and some open green space to kick a ball, like the half courts for basketball, or to smack a tennis ball up against a wall, things like that. And that's never come through. So I think that, to me, that's one of my concerns. I think certainly everything on the big issues list that you've got, I concur with. Employment is certainly a major issue, because that'll help the viability of businesses in the Gungahlin region. But yeah, it's what are we going to do for our youth?
Yep, no, good feedback, Mark. I'm trying to reduce the number of the top level bullet points to something that the average candidate can digest and respond to, because if it ends up being a laundry basket, it's too hard. But I think the under community facilities for Gungahlin as it evolves around that sort of teen category is a good variation that we need to weave in somehow. Yep, Henley, I see you are ready to rock and roll. Do you have a question, Henry?
Yep. Yeah, I do. Sorry, I'm just unmuting and stuff.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks, Peter. So I think what we need as well about the school infrastructure and stuff as well. The Gungahlin Community, the Gungahlin College running classes to the extended hours. So some of the classes they need to do till 8 p.m. and because they don't have enough space and stuff. So because we got the growing population, we need to support the schooling facilities as well, and then make sure that because a lot of young families at the moment, as Mark said as well, like the kids all going to grow up and stuff. So we need the college facility to be up to the speed. So I think we should also put some radar on those things as well.
Cool. Okay. Education. All right. Education, young teens. Alrighty. I see a lot of people without their hands up. I'm looking for chat. I see Kevin Cox using a technique we'll call human waving. So I'll ask him to unmute and ask his question.
One of the things that makes it difficult to argue for anything is not having appropriate statistics. One of the things that would really help us would be to have numbers associated with social amenities and all the different things that we've got here for all the different areas of Canberra. Until we have that, people say, well, you've got it all anyway, you don't need to. Well, we don't think we do have it all, and we think the numbers would stack up in our favour. So it would be good for them to measure what actually goes on throughout Canberra, and so that we can make decisions on facts as opposed to opinions.
Look, I think that's a great question, Kevin. Some of you may be familiar with an ACT mapping tool called ACT Map-I, ACT Mappy, which provides, actually I can quickly show this, just for those who may never have seen it. Let's share screen. So people should be able to see now a web browser to the ACT ACT Mappy website. What I want to point to you is, as I sort of scroll through this, the mapping tool enables you to take a bushfire view of Canberra, or look at all the developments, or look at some aerial imagery, which, by the way, the latest aerial imagery was done in 2020, January 2020. So if you want to look at some really up-to-date aerial photos of Canberra, aerial imagery is good. There's some historic plan stuff, significant trees can be registered. For example, the tree that was in the middle of the establishment or tower site was a registered tree, yet the development application in 29 was approved for it. That tree was cut down on Sunday, which was a bit sad in my view. But back to Kevin's point around social amenity, there used to be social infrastructure. There was a view of Canberra that showed sporting facilities, community halls, aged care facilities, and so on. And I was looking at it about 2 months ago and realized that the data hadn't been updated for 5 years. So I contacted relevant ministers, Suzanne Orr, Community Services, Mr. Berry for Recreational Services, and said, oh, your data's not up to date. Can you please update it? So they deleted the map from the website. And so that data's not there. But you're right. I might revisit that and get that data back, because it is really quite compelling in some way. And EPSDD have indicated they are doing a community services survey at the moment.
Well, even a simple thing like walkability averages, if you like, would be would point out quite a lot of different things. And this is particularly important, I think, for the poor people who are going into Molonglo. I mean, it's not just us.
Sorry, Kevin, this is a talk about Gungahlin. I don't care about the people of Molonglo. Although you do realise that Gungahlin did a great favour to the people of Molonglo. Our complaints about not having roads duplicated meant that the John Gorton Drive, which is the big road in Molongo is in fact your carriageway. So they should thank us for that. So.
You can't get across it, is the only problem.
It's just a river, okay? It's not that big a deal. Okay, so that's good point, stats around walkability. And I know that Pedal Power and others do have other maps that they maintain for other things, so that's good. All right, so let me get control of my screen. I'll put my big list back up again. Where has it gone? I lost my list. June, PowerPoint slideshow. Share that. So, right. Lots of comments here for a hospital emergency, but yeah, I don't think we're ever going to get a hospital emergency department here. Andrew did ask, what are the health services that people have asked for? I haven't drilled into that question, but we can certainly do that. Health specifics. Some people have mentioned maternity services and others targeted at our demographic. More chat. No, I have got the chat. No, participants, that's what I want. Okay. Any other questions? Anyone from Facebook questioning? If we went out and said, this is what matters to get people in Gungahlin, everyone in this call would go, yep, that's fine. That seems about right. Yep. Okay. All right. Well, on that basis, we'll press forward. I'm just checking, nothing else in the chat. No. Okay. All right. I think that's all for tonight then. Hopefully it's been a useful conversation for those in the call tonight and online. I've certainly found it interesting putting the data together for tonight. We will get the slides on board. If people want them, I'm happy to email them to them. If there's nothing else, I'll just stay online for a bit. Henley and Andrew. Okay, Henley.
Just do one more thing with the light trail. It's happening at the peak. I know they increased the frequency in the peak hours, but what I noticed is it's always rushy, and you can't go comfortably with the light trail where we were able to do it when there was a bus going to the city. I think what I was thinking was, is there any way they can add an extra carriage? I don't know what they call it, but like a cabin, extra cabin, like in Sydney. In Sydney, I noticed it's bigger than Canberra one. It's a bit longer and stuff. So
2 times, double.
Yeah, double. So I'm just wondering, what can we? Is there a possibility? We can ask them or something. They can do.
Yeah. I mean, that question came up when Peter Steele was speaking. The short answer is no, because the stations aren't big enough. That you couldn't put a double length or even an extra one, apparently. But there definitely needs to be further work on increasing the capacity of light rail, particularly if we are going to end up being over, heavily tilted towards being more dormitory rather than workplace in Gungahlin. We need to make some adjustments. Andrew, you had a question? Braddock? You need to unmute.
Yep. Not so much a question, just an expression of my appreciation to yourself and the rest of the GCC for conducting that exercise and capturing that information. That's really very useful for us going forward. I appreciate it. So thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Andrew. That's why they pay us the big bucks. Yep, Jacob.
Peter. Peter.
Yeah, go ahead.
Peter, just a quick question. In the education space, was there any response or any demand from the community regarding having a technology institute like a CIT institute in Gungahlin? Because I heard a lot of feedback from the community when I meet the people. So I just want to know whether there was any huge demand from community regarding having a CIT in Gungahlin.
It's certainly, Kevin, I think, did the analysis on the open-ended question because we didn't ask any specific questions about education, but in the summary does say, in fact, I think I might have even had the summary up earlier this evening. Yeah, main issues: education, overcrowding in Gungahlin. A mention was a lack of further tertiary training facilities. So there's an existing CIT campus integrated with Gungahlin College and the Gungahlin Library, but it's a modest campus, I think would be a fair statement. But yeah, it is something that's come up.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, no worries. Mark Scarborough again.
Thanks, Peter. One of the things I've noticed over the last maybe year and a half is the absence of our local MLAs. I assume they're getting invitations to these meetings. The lack of visibility of them, outside of the lead up to elections is concerning. And this community council is here to represent a major part of their electorate. Where are they?
So certainly that they're invited to. I know they're on our mailing list because occasionally they'll respond. We've made a point of trying to invite the MLAs along to speak, just in general about their position and what's going on. And so, in the last year, we've certainly had Alistair and James and Michael and Deepak have all spoken in the last 12, 18 months. We have been trying very hard to get Suzanne Orr, but she's been unable to make a Wednesday meeting for multiple months in a row now. So we continue to pursue that, mostly around general stuff, but she's the Minister for Community Services, so we're pretty interested to find out what she passed a motion or raised a motion in the Legislative Assembly to look at this community facility in the town centre, but for the life of me, can't find any detail about it. And in fact, I think someone from my Gungahlin, that great little private company we had until they got sold off, did an article on that, but I've not got any detail, and we're chasing that. Although one of the other MLAs has said they chase it up. So we'll certainly be running an election forum leading up until September, but no, well, look, we've had trouble getting some of the MLAs to come along. Some of it's scheduling, and some of it is I guess, priorities. So we did have the Deputy Chief Minister, Yvette Berry, recently talking about sport and rec. But yeah, no, good question.
Thanks, Peter.
More, no chats. 4 new messages. It's going to light rail to the agreement. Okay, all right. I see no hands up. I see no live chats. Kevin, no one else waving. No, nothing on Facebook, Dave. No, Dave's not hearing. All right. Look, thank you again for participating. I actually find the electronic version of these meetings actually pretty workable. Maybe that's because I can just mute and control people, and I just like that. But thank you very much for participating and supporting the Community Council. We do appreciate people giving their feedback and letting us know what matters to them. The survey's been a great piece of work. Again, thank you to Kevin and to my colleagues for putting all that together. It's good stuff. All right, thanks very much. We'll be back in July. If there are any particular topics you'd like to see addressed, apart from getting some of the MLAs to come along and have a chat, we'd be happy to hear from it. So thanks very much. Good night, all.